I never thought a funeral would be the day that would change my entire life forever. But standing in that mahogany-paneled room at St. Mary's Cathedral in Richmond, Virginia, watching my cousin Jessica flip her platinum blonde hair while whispering poison into our relatives' ears, I had no idea that Grandma Maggie had been planning something that would turn everything upside down. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm about to tell you how I went from being called the poor branch of the family tree to owning the entire forest. This story isn't just about money or inheritance. It's about discovering that sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who see your worth when everyone else is too blind to notice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The September air in Richmond was thick with humidity and the scent of magnolias when I walked through the heavy oak doors of St. Mary's Cathedral. I smoothed down my simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to every formal event for the past 3 years because it was the only one I owned. The fabric was starting to show wear at the seams, but I'd carefully mended it the night before, hoping no one would notice. Grandma Maggie's funeral was everything you'd expect from a woman who'd built a real estate empire from nothing. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across walls, lined with fresh white roses and lilies. The pews were filled with Richmond's elite, business associates, and family members I barely recognized anymore. Everyone dressed in expensive black attire that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I slipped into a back pew, trying to make myself invisible. That's where I'd learned to exist in this family anyway, in the spaces between other people's conversations, in the shadows of their grand gestures. My mother, Karen, had been Grandma Maggie's youngest daughter, the one who'd married for love instead of money, who'd chosen to be a school teacher instead of joining the family business. After she died in a car accident when I was 16, I'd felt more like an outsider than ever. Grandma Maggie had always been different with me, though. While the rest of the family saw me as Karen's poor daughter, the one who worked at a diner and went to community college, she saw something else. She'd visit me in my tiny apartment in Scott's Addition, bringing homemade cookies and stories about building Mitchell properties from a single rental house in the 1960s. She'd sit at my wobbly kitchen table, ignoring the peeling linoleum and the radiator that clanged all night, and she'd ask me about my dreams. "Sarah, honey," she'd say in her gentle southern drawl, "success isn't about where you start. It's about how far you're willing to climb and how many people you help along the way." I'd treasure those visits, especially after working double shifts at Sunrise Diner, when my feet ached and my back felt like it might give out. Grandma Maggie never made me feel ashamed about my circumstances. She never looked at my secondhand furniture or my clearance rack clothes with pity. She looked at me with pride, as if I was already exactly who I was meant to be. The service began with a minister I didn't recognize, speaking about Grandma Maggie's contributions to the community. I listened to stories about her charitable work, her business acumen, her role as a matriarch. But they felt hollow, like they were describing a stranger. They didn't mention how she'd drive across town every Sunday to take me to lunch at small cafes, where she'd insist on hearing about my classes at VCU. They didn't talk about how she'd slip me $20 bills for groceries, even though we both knew I'd probably spend it on textbooks instead. Halfway through the service, I felt someone slide into the pew beside me. Jessica Coleman, my cousin, had somehow materialized in her designer black Chanel suit and matching heels that probably cost more than my car. Her makeup was flawless, her hair perfectly styled in loose waves that bounced as she moved. She smelled like expensive perfume and entitlement. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I almost didn't see you back here. I saved you a seat up front with the family." I knew it was a lie. Jessica had never saved me a seat anywhere. At family gatherings, I was usually relegated to the children's table long past the age when it was appropriate, or I'd find myself helping in the kitchen while the real family members discussed business and vacations I couldn't afford. "I'm fine here," I whispered back, hoping she'd leave me alone. But Jessica wasn't finished. She glanced around to make sure her parents, Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda, were watching, then leaned closer. "You know, Sarah, it's really admirable how you've managed to stay so positive despite everything. I mean, working at that diner, living in that neighborhood, driving that old car. You're like the poster child for making the best of difficult circumstances." Her words felt like tiny knives wrapped in silk. This was Jessica's specialty, the art of delivering insults disguised as compliments. She'd perfected it over the years, especially after she'd started her lifestyle blog and Instagram account, where she showcased her trust fund lifestyle to thousands of followers who envied her designer handbags and European vacations. "I'm doing just fine," I said quietly, keeping my eyes fixed on the altar where Grandma Maggie's casket was surrounded by elaborate floral arrangements. Jessica's laugh was soft but sharp. "Oh, I know you are, sweetie. And honestly, I think it's beautiful how you've embraced being the poor branch of the family tree. Not everyone can carry that with such grace." The poor branch. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd heard variations of this sentiment my entire life, whispered at family reunions and holiday gatherings. The poor branch, the one who didn't quite fit, the daughter of the sister who'd married beneath her station. But hearing it spoken aloud, at Grandma Maggie's funeral no less, felt like being slapped. I turned to look at Jessica, this cousin who'd never worked a day in her life, who posted photos of her breakfast at five-star restaurants while I was heating up ramen noodles in my studio apartment. Her blue eyes sparkled with malicious satisfaction, as if she'd been waiting years for the perfect moment to deliver this particular cruelty. "That's enough, Jessica," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying more steel than I'd ever heard from myself before. She raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying my discomfort. "I'm just saying, Sarah, you've really made the most of your situation." I mean, Grandma Maggie always had such a soft spot for charity cases. Charity cases. The words echoed in my mind as I watched Jessica's perfectly glossed lips curve into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. This was how she saw me. How they all saw me. Not as Margaret Mitchell's granddaughter, not as Karen's daughter, but as a charity case, to be pitied and patronized. I wanted to tell her that Grandma Maggie had never made me feel like charity. I wanted to explain that those Sunday lunches weren't about pity but about genuine connection. I wanted to describe how Grandma Maggie would light up when I told her about my business classes, how she'd ask detailed questions about my studies, as if my community college education was just as important as Jessica's private university degree. But I couldn't find the words. The pain of losing Grandma Maggie, combined with Jessica's casual cruelty, had created a knot in my throat that made speaking impossible. So I sat there, in my carefully mended dress, feeling smaller than I had in years. The service continued around us, but I barely heard another word. I was thinking about the last conversation I'd had with Grandma Maggie, just 3 weeks before she passed away. She'd been in her bed at the assisted living facility, her hands fragile but her mind sharp as ever. She'd asked me about my plans after graduation, about my dreams of starting my own business someday. "You know, Sarah," she'd said, her voice weak but her eyes bright, "I've been watching you for years. Watching how you handle adversity, how you treat people who can't do anything for you, how you never let hardship make you bitter. You remind me of myself when I was your age." I'd laughed at that, thinking she was just being kind. Margaret Mitchell, the woman who'd built a real estate empire, couldn't possibly see herself in her granddaughter who served coffee and pancakes for minimum wage plus tips. But she'd squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "I'm serious, honey. You have something that can't be taught or bought. You have character. And character, real character, is the foundation of everything worthwhile." Now, sitting in the cathedral with Jessica's words echoing in my ears, I wondered if Grandma Maggie had been seeing something that wasn't really there. Maybe I was just the poor branch, the family member who'd never amount to anything significant. The service ended with a procession to the cemetery, where Grandma Maggie would be laid to rest beside my grandfather. I followed the crowd outside, grateful for the fresh air and the chance to escape the suffocating atmosphere of whispered conversations and pitying glances. At the graveside, I stood at the back of the gathered crowd, watching as the minister said final prayers over the casket. Jessica and her parents stood in the front row, along with other cousins and family members I rarely saw outside of funerals and weddings. I noticed how they all seemed to know exactly where to stand, how they moved with the confidence of people who belonged. Uncle Robert, Jessica's father and Grandma Maggie's eldest son, stepped forward to speak. He was a broad man with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from years of running his own construction company. He'd always been polite to me, but distant, as if I was a friend's child rather than his niece. "My mother was a remarkable woman," he began, his voice carrying across the cemetery. "She built something extraordinary from nothing, and she never forgot where she came from. She taught us that family was everything, that we should always take care of our own. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat. Take care of our own. When had they ever taken care of me? When my mother died, they'd sent flowers to the funeral and offered their condolences, but no one had checked on the 16-year-old girl who was suddenly alone in the world. When I'd struggled to pay for college, working multiple jobs while trying to keep my grades up, none of them had offered help. When I'd needed a reference for apartment applications or job interviews, I'd never thought to ask any of them, because I knew they saw me as Karen's daughter, not as family. But Grandma Maggie had been different. She'd been the one to help me navigate financial aid applications for college. She'd been the one to drive me to campus visits and orientation sessions. She'd been the one to celebrate my small victories and encourage me through my defeats. After the burial, people began to drift away, heading to the repast at the country club where Jessica's parents had reserved a private dining room. I lingered by the graveside, not ready to face another few hours of being ignored or patronized by relatives who saw me as an obligation rather than family. "Sarah, honey, you coming to the club?" Aunt Linda appeared beside me, her voice artificially bright. She was a petite woman who'd married into the family but had quickly adopted their attitudes about social hierarchy and proper behavior. "I think I'll skip it," I said, not meeting her eyes. "I need to get to work anyway." It was a lie. I'd requested the day off from the diner, but I didn't want to spend my evening being reminded of everything I lacked compared to the rest of the family. Aunt Linda's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been relief. "Oh, of course. Well, if you change your mind, you know where we'll be." She walked away without another word, her heels clicking against the pavement as she headed toward her BMW. I watched her go, feeling the familiar mixture of hurt and resignation that had become my default emotional state around these. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. People. I was about to leave when I heard someone calling my name. A man in an expensive suit was walking toward me, briefcase in hand. He was tall and distinguished, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Miss Mitchell? Sarah Mitchell?" I nodded, wondering if I was in trouble for lingering too long at the cemetery. "I'm David Harrison," he said, extending his hand. "I was your grandmother's attorney. I've been looking for you." My heart skipped. Had I done something wrong? Was there some final bill or obligation I needed to take care of? "I'm sorry, is there something I need to sign?" I asked, shaking his hand. Mr. Harrison smiled, and there was something warm in his expression that reminded me of Grandma Maggie. "Actually, Miss Mitchell, I need to speak with you about your grandmother's will. Would you be able to come to my office tomorrow afternoon, say around 2 o'clock? "Her will?" I felt confused. "But I assumed everything would go to Uncle Robert and the family business." "There are some specific provisions regarding you," Mr. Harrison said carefully. "I think it would be better if we discussed them privately. My office is on Monument Avenue, Harrison and Associates. Do you know where that is?" I nodded, though I'd never been to that part of Richmond. Monument Avenue was where the old money lived and worked, where the law firms and investment offices occupied historic mansions converted into professional spaces. "Excellent. I'll see you tomorrow at 2. He handed me a business card with an address embossed in gold lettering. "And Sarah? Your grandmother spoke of you often. She was very proud of you." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing alone in the cemetery with more questions than answers. What could Grandma Maggie have left me? Maybe a small keepsake, a piece of jewelry or a favorite book. Maybe enough money to help with my final semester of college. I tried not to get my hopes up, but I couldn't help wondering what provisions she'd made that required a private meeting with her attorney. The next day, I called in sick to work at the diner and spent the morning trying to decide what to wear to a lawyer's office. My wardrobe was limited, but I settled on a navy blue dress I'd bought at a thrift store and a cardigan that hid the small stain on the sleeve. I took the bus to Monument Avenue, watching the neighborhoods change from middle class to affluent as we traveled through the city. Harrison and Associates occupied a beautiful Victorian mansion painted in cream and gold. The interior was all polished wood and oriental rugs, with oil paintings of distinguished men in suits lining the walls. A receptionist with perfect posture and a crisp white blouse directed me to Mr. Harrison's office on the second floor. His office was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound legal volumes and a massive mahogany desk that looked like it could seat a small family for dinner. Mr. Harrison stood as I entered, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Thank you for coming, Sarah," he said, settling back into his chair. "I know yesterday was difficult for you." "It was," I agreed, still wondering why I was there. Mr. Harrison opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. I had the privilege of working with her for over 20 years, and I can tell you that she was always very deliberate in her decisions." He paused, studying my face. "She spoke of you frequently, you know. She was incredibly proud of your determination, your work ethic, your character. She often said you reminded her of herself at your age." I felt tears prick my eyes. "She told me that once." "I'm sure she did. Margaret was not one to keep her thoughts to herself." He smiled slightly. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you because I think that's what your grandmother would have wanted. She has left you something significant, something that will change your life." My heart began to race. "What do you mean?" Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his expression serious. "Your grandmother has left you Mitchell Properties. The entire company. All of it." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt dizzy, disoriented, as if the room had suddenly tilted sideways. "I'm sorry, what?" "Mitchell Properties. All of its assets, holdings, and investments. The shopping centers, the office buildings, the rental properties, the investment portfolio, everything." He consulted his papers. "The current valuation is approximately $47 million. I couldn't breathe. This had to be a mistake. "But what about Uncle Robert? What about Jessica and the rest of the family? They're the ones who work in the business." "Your grandmother was very specific about her wishes," Mr. Harrison said gently. "She left your uncle a substantial sum, enough to ensure his comfort for the rest of his life. She also provided for Jessica and your other cousins. But the business itself, the empire she built, she wanted to go to you." "But why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. Mr. Harrison pulled out another document, this one in Grandma Maggie's familiar handwriting. "She left you a letter. Perhaps that will help explain her decision." With trembling hands, I took the letter. The paper was cream-colored and heavy, the kind Grandma Maggie had always used for important correspondence. Her handwriting was slightly shaky but still recognizable. "My dearest Sarah," I read aloud, my voice cracking. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and David is explaining to you what I've decided to do with my life's work. I imagine you're shocked. Maybe even scared. That's normal, sweetheart. I felt the same way when I first started building this company all those years ago. I want you to know that this decision didn't come lightly. I've watched you for years, watched how you handle hardship with grace, how you treat everyone with kindness regardless of their station in life, how you never let circumstances defeat your spirit. You have something that can't be taught or inherited, something that money can't buy. You have integrity. I've watched the rest of the family too, honey. I love them dearly, but they've never known struggle the way you have. They've never had to choose between textbooks and groceries, never had to work 2 jobs while going to school, never had to prove themselves over and over again. They've had everything handed to them, and while that's not necessarily their fault, it hasn't made them strong. You are strong, Sarah. You're strong in ways that matter. You know the value of hard work because you've done it. You know the importance of treating people well because you've been on the receiving end of both kindness and cruelty. You understand that money is a tool, not a goal, because you've seen what really matters in life. I'm not giving you this company because I feel sorry for you. I'm giving it to you because I believe you'll do something meaningful with it. I believe you'll use it to help others the way you've always helped others. I believe you'll build something even better than what I created. There will be people who question this decision. They'll say you're too young, too inexperienced, too different from the rest of the family. Don't listen to them. I built this company from nothing when I was younger than you are now. I had people tell me I couldn't do it then too. Prove them wrong the way I did. Use this gift wisely, sweetheart. Help people who need helping. Create opportunities for those who deserve them. And remember that you didn't receive this because you're the poor branch of the family tree. You received it because you're the strongest branch. the one capable of growing into something magnificent. I love you, Sarah. I'm proud of you. And I can't wait to see what you'll accomplish. All my love, Grandma Maggie. I finished reading through tears that had been steadily building throughout the letter. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. Mr. Harrison sat quietly, allowing me to process what I'd just learned. "This is real?" I finally asked. "Very real," he confirmed. "There are, of course, some conditions and legal procedures we need to go through, but yes, Sarah, you are now the owner of Mitchell Properties." I felt like I was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. How could this be happening? Yesterday I was the poor branch, the family member who worked at a diner and lived in a studio apartment. Today I was apparently worth $47 million. What happens now? I asked. Now we begin the process of transitioning everything into your name. There will be paperwork, meetings with the current management team, discussions about the future of the company. It's going to be overwhelming at first, but you don't have to do it alone. Your grandmother made sure there are people in place to help you. Mr. Harrison explained the immediate steps. I would need to meet with the company's current general manager, review financial statements, and begin to understand the scope of what I'd inherited. There would be board meetings, property visits, and countless decisions to make. Take your time, he advised. This is a lot to absorb. But remember what your grandmother wrote in her letter. She believed in you. She saw something in you that she didn't see in anyone else. I left the law office in a daze, walking down Monument Avenue like a ghost. Nothing looked the same anymore. The historic mansions, the perfectly manicured lawns, the expensive cars parked along the street. It all felt different now that I was supposedly part of this world. I thought about Jessica calling me the poor branch just 24 hours ago. I thought about Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda, about all the family gatherings where I'd felt like an outsider. I thought about the years of struggling to pay rent, of working late shifts at the diner, of buying clothes at thrift stores and eating ramen noodles for dinner. Most of all, I thought about Grandma Maggie. She'd been planning this for years, watching me struggle and grow, seeing something in me that I'd never seen in myself. She'd believed that I, of all people, was worthy of inheriting her life's work. The weight of that belief, that responsibility, was almost crushing. But underneath the fear and confusion, I felt something else beginning to grow. A spark of something that might have been hope, or determination, or maybe just the beginning of understanding that my life had just changed forever. I had no idea what came next, but I knew that tomorrow would be different from today. And for the first time in my life, different felt like it might be something wonderful. The drive home from Mr. Harrison's office felt like traveling through a different universe. Every traffic light, every building, every person walking down the sidewalk seemed foreign now that I carried this impossible secret. I kept touching the business card in my pocket, making sure it was real, making sure I hadn't imagined the entire afternoon. My studio apartment in Scott's Addition looked smaller than ever when I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to the top floor. The hallway smelled like cigarettes and old carpet, a sharp contrast to the polished elegance of the law office. I fumbled with my keys, my hands still shaking from everything Mr. Harrison had told me. Inside, my tiny space felt almost claustrophobic. The Murphy bed was folded down because I never bothered to put it up during the day. My textbooks were scattered across the small table that served as both desk and dining room. A pile of clean laundry sat on the only chair, waiting to be put away in the narrow closet that barely held my meager wardrobe. $47 million. The number echoed in my mind as I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror that had a crack running down one corner. The girl looking back at me was the same one who'd woken up that morning worried about whether she had enough quarters for the laundromat. Same brown hair that needed a cut, same tired eyes, same face that had never known luxury or ease. I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Emily Chen's number. Emily had been my closest friend since we'd met in our freshman economics class at VCU. She was the only person I trusted. Completely, the only one who'd seen me cry over textbook costs and celebrate getting extra shifts at the diner. "Sarah, how was the funeral?" Emily's voice was warm and concerned when she answered. "Emily, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me you won't think I've lost my mind." "Okay, now you're scaring me. What happened?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. About Jessica's cruelty at the funeral, about Mr. Harrison finding me at the cemetery, about the inheritance that seemed too impossible to be real. Emily listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. She was typically full of questions and opinions, but she stayed silent until I finished. "Sarah," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "are you absolutely sure this isn't some kind of mistake? That's what I keep thinking." But Mr. Harrison seemed certain, and he had all these documents. "Emily, I saw my grandmother's letter. It was definitely her handwriting." $47 million, Emily repeated slowly. "Sarah, do you realize what this means? You're rich, like seriously rich." The word felt strange and foreign. Rich. I'd never imagined myself as anything other than someone who scraped by, someone who counted pennies and shopped clearance racks. Rich was Jessica posting photos of her designer shoes. Rich was Uncle Robert's house in Glen Allen, with the circular driveway and the swimming pool. Rich was not Sarah Mitchell from Scott's Addition. "I don't feel rich," I said. "I feel terrified." "What are you going to do?" It was a simple question with an impossible answer. What was I going to do? I had no experience running a business, let alone a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. I'd never been in a boardroom, never made decisions that affected other people's livelihoods, never had to think beyond paying my own rent and buying groceries. "I don't know," I admitted. "Mr. Harrison said there are people who can help me, that I don't have to figure it all out alone. But Emily, what if I mess this up? What if I'm not smart enough, or strong enough, or whatever it takes, to handle this?" "Sarah Mitchell." Emily's voice became firm in the way it did when she was about to give me a pep talk. "You are the most determined person I know. You've been working 2 jobs while going to school full-time. You've never missed a rent payment, even when you had to eat peanut butter sandwiches for a week. You got a 4.0 GPA last semester while pulling double shifts at the diner. If anyone can handle this, it's you." Her words helped calm some of the panic that had been building in my chest. Emily was right about one thing. I had survived a lot of difficult situations. Maybe I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. "There's something else," I said. "The family doesn't know yet. Mr. Harrison said there would be a formal reading of the will next week." "Oh my God," Emily breathed. "Jessica is going to lose her mind." That thought had been lurking in the back of my consciousness all afternoon. Jessica, who'd called me the poor branch of the family tree, was about to discover that the poor branch had inherited everything. Uncle Robert, who'd always treated me like a distant relative, was about to learn that his mother had chosen her struggling granddaughter over her successful son. "I have to go to work tomorrow," I said, suddenly remembering my real life. "I'm scheduled for the breakfast shift at Sunrise Diner." "Sarah, you just inherited $47 million. I think you can call in sick." But I wasn't ready for that yet. The inheritance still felt like a dream, something that might evaporate if I examined it too closely. My job at the diner was real. The early morning shift, the smell of bacon grease, the regular customers who knew my name, that was my actual life. The other thing, the impossible thing, would have to wait. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30, just like I had every Thursday for the past 2 years. I put on my black pants and white button-down shirt, tied my hair back in a ponytail, and walked the 6 blocks to Sunrise Diner. The September air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief from the humidity of the past few weeks. Tony Rodriguez, the manager, was already there when I arrived, prepping for the breakfast rush. Tony was in his 50s, a former line cook who'd worked his way up to management through sheer determination and an encyclopedic knowledge of every aspect of restaurant operations. He'd always been kind to me, understanding when I needed time off for exams or when I had to leave early for evening classes. "Morning, Sarah," he called from behind the grill. "How was the funeral yesterday?" "It was okay," I said, tying my apron around my waist. "Thank you for letting me have the day off." "Of course. Family comes first." Family. I thought about that word as I began setting up my section, filling salt and pepper shakers, and making sure each table had adequate napkins and condiments. What was family exactly? Was it the people who shared your DNA but treated you like an obligation? Or was it the people who showed up for you, Who cared about your dreams? Who saw your worth even when you couldn't see it yourself? Grandma Maggie had been family in the truest sense of the word. She'd been the one person in my extended family who'd made me feel valued and loved unconditionally. And now she'd given me something that would change everything. The breakfast rush began around 7, and I threw myself into the familiar rhythm of taking orders, serving coffee, and making sure everyone had what they needed. There was something comforting about the routine, the simple interactions with customers who wanted nothing more complicated than eggs over easy and wheat toast. Mrs. Patterson came in for her usual booth by the window. She was a retired teacher who'd been coming to Sunrise Diner for breakfast every Thursday for as long as I'd been working there. She always ordered the same thing, oatmeal with brown sugar and a cup of black coffee, and she always left exactly a $3 tip. "How are you today, dear?" she asked as I poured her coffee. "I'm well, Mrs. Patterson. How about you?" "Oh, same old complaints. My arthritis is acting up, and my daughter wants me to move to one of those assisted living places." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "But I'm not ready to give up my independence just yet." Independence. The word struck me as particularly meaningful given everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Mrs. Patterson, with her modest pension and her small apartment, had something I'd never really had: true independence. She made her own choices, lived according to her own values, answered to no one but herself. I'd thought I was independent, working my way through college and paying my own bills. But the truth was, I'd always been dependent on other people's approval, other people's definition of success. I'd let Jessica's words hurt me because part of me believed them. I'd felt ashamed of my circumstances because I'd internalized the family's judgment about what mattered and what didn't. But maybe independence wasn't about having money or status. Maybe it was about knowing who you were and refusing to let other people define your worth. Around noon, during the lull between breakfast and lunch, Tony called me over to the register. "Sarah, I've got a weird question for you," he said, looking puzzled. "Some guy in an expensive suit was in here earlier asking about you. Said he was looking for Sarah Mitchell, wanted to know if you worked here." My heart skipped. "Did he say what he wanted?" "Nah, just asked about your schedule. I told him I couldn't give out employee information, but he seemed pretty insistent." "You in some kind of trouble?" "No, nothing like that," I said quickly. "Probably just something related to my grandmother's estate. She passed away earlier this week." Tony's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, kid. Take whatever time you need, okay? Family stuff comes first." But I knew the man in the expensive suit probably wasn't there about routine estate business. Word was getting out somehow, and I wasn't ready for the attention that was coming. I finished my shift and walked home, my mind racing, with possibilities and concerns. The inheritance was supposed to be confidential until the formal reading of the will, but rumors had a way of spreading in Richmond's business community. Maybe someone at the law firm had said something, or maybe there were legal filings that had become public record. Back in my apartment, I found a voicemail on my phone from a number I didn't recognize. "Miss Mitchell, this is Patricia Williams from Richmond Business Journal. I'm calling because we've received some interesting information about Margaret Mitchell's estate, and I was hoping to speak with you for a story we're working on. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." My hands were shaking as I deleted the message. A reporter. Someone was already investigating the inheritance, which meant the secret wouldn't stay secret much longer. I called Mr. Harrison's office, but his secretary told me he was in court for the afternoon. I left a message asking him to call me as soon as possible, then spent the rest of the day pacing around my tiny apartment, wondering how much my life was about to change. The answer came the next morning when I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Emily had sent me a screenshot of the Richmond Business Journal's website with a headline that made my stomach drop: "Local diner waitress inherits multi-million-dollar real estate empire." The article was brief but detailed enough to make me realize that my private world was about to become very public. It mentioned my job at Sunrise Diner, my address in Scott's Addition, and even included a quote from a family source expressing surprise at Margaret Mitchell's decision to bypass her son in favor of her granddaughter. I knew immediately who the family source was. Jessica or Uncle Robert, probably both. had decided to get ahead of the story by portraying me as an undeserving beneficiary who'd somehow manipulated an elderly woman. My phone rang as I was reading the article for the third time. Mr. Harrison's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah, I just saw the journal article," he said without preamble. "I'm so sorry. Someone leaked information that should have remained confidential until the formal reading." "What do I do now?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden attention. "First, don't talk to any reporters. Not yet. We need to get through the legal process before you make any public statements. Second, I think we should move up the formal reading of the will. The longer we wait, the more speculation there will be. When? This afternoon, if possible. I'll contact your uncle and the other beneficiaries. Can you be at my office at 3? I agreed, then spent the next few hours trying to figure out what to wear to the most important meeting of my life. My wardrobe hadn't expanded overnight, so I settled on the same navy dress I'd worn to the initial meeting with Mr. Harrison, paired with a blazer I'd borrowed from Emily. The law office felt different this time. There were more cars in the parking lot, including Uncle Robert's black Mercedes and what I assumed was Jessica's white BMW. I recognized several other vehicles belonging to family members I rarely saw except at weddings and funerals. The receptionist led me to a larger conference room where Uncle Robert, Aunt Linda, Jessica, and 3 other cousins were already seated around a polished mahogany table. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jessica's usual perfect composure had cracked slightly. Her makeup was flawless as always, but her eyes were hard and calculating. Uncle Robert stood when I entered, his expression unreadable. "Sarah," he said with a curt nod. "Uncle Robert," I replied, taking the empty chair at the far end of the table. Mr. Harrison entered a moment later carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of a man who'd dealt with family drama many times before. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "As you know, there's been some unfortunate publicity regarding Margaret's will, so I thought it best to address everything formally rather than let speculation continue." He opened the folder and began reading from the official document. The legal language was dense and formal, but the basic facts were clear. Uncle Robert would receive $2 million and the house in Glen Allen. Each of the grandchildren except me would receive $500,000. Various charities would receive substantial donations. And Mitchell Properties, in its entirety, would go to me. The silence that followed Mr. Harrison's reading was deafening. Jessica's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied foundation. Uncle Robert stared at the table as if he could make the words disappear through sheer force of will. Finally, Jessica found her voice. "This is ridiculous," she said, her tone sharp and brittle. "Sarah doesn't know anything about running a business. She's a waitress. The decision was your grandmother's to make," Mr. Harrison said calmly, and she was very clear about her reasoning. "What reasoning?" Uncle Robert asked, speaking for the first time since the reading began. "I've been involved in the family business for 30 years. I understand every aspect of the operation." Mr. Harrison pulled out Grandma Maggie's letter. Apparently she'd written individual letters to each family member, not just me. "Your mother was very specific about her decision, Robert. She wrote, 'I'm leaving the business to Sarah because she has something the others lack, genuine character, and an understanding of what it means to work for everything you have. She will use this opportunity to help people, not just accumulate wealth for its own sake.'" Jessica laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Character? She's been lying to us for years, pretending to be poor while she was obviously manipulating Grandma Maggie behind our backs." "I never manipulated anyone," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the reading began. "I visited Grandma Maggie because I loved her, not because I wanted anything from her." "Oh, please," Jessica shot back. "You expect us to believe you had no idea this was coming? That you just happened to be the perfect granddaughter while the rest of us were ignored?" The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth in it. I had been closer to Grandma Maggie than the others, but not because I was scheming or manipulative. I'd been close to her because she was the only family member who'd ever treated me like I mattered. "I had no idea," I said, meeting Jessica's angry stare. "I was as shocked as you are." "Shocked," Uncle Robert repeated slowly. Sarah, do you have any idea what you've inherited? This isn't just money we're talking about. This is a business that employs over 200 people. There are investors, tenants, contractors, suppliers, all depending on leadership that knows what it's doing. His words hit their intended target. I felt the familiar wave of self-doubt that had plagued me my entire life. He was right, of course. I didn't know anything about running a business of that size. I'd never managed anyone, never made decisions that affected hundreds of lives, never dealt with the kind of responsibility that came with that much money and power. But then I remembered Grandma Maggie's letter. Her belief that I had something the others lacked. I thought about the past few years, working multiple jobs while maintaining good grades, solving problems with limited resources, treating everyone with respect regardless of their position. "You're right," I said, surprising everyone including myself. "I don't know how to run a real estate empire. But I can learn, and I think that's exactly what Grandma Maggie wanted. Someone who would approach this with fresh eyes and genuine care for the people involved." "Fresh eyes," Jessica scoffed. "Is that what we're calling inexperience now?" Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "I think it's important to remember that Margaret thought very carefully about this decision. She didn't make it lightly, and she didn't make it without considering all of you. But she believed Sarah was the right person to carry on her legacy." The meeting continued for another hour, with various family members expressing their shock, disappointment, and in some cases barely concealed anger. But the will was legally sound, and there was nothing they could do to change it. As we filed out of the conference room, Uncle Robert pulled me aside. "Sarah, I want you to know that I respect my mother's decision, even if I don't understand it," he said. "But I also want you to understand what you're taking on. This business has been my life for 3 decades. If you decide you're not up for it, if you want to sell everything and walk away, I hope you'll give me first consideration." His words were polite, but I could hear the assumption underneath them. He was already planning for my failure, already positioning himself to pick up the pieces when I inevitably proved I wasn't capable of handling the responsibility. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, though I had no intention of giving up before I'd even tried. Jessica was waiting by the elevator when I reached the lobby. She'd composed herself during the meeting, but now her mask had slipped again. "You know this won't last," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You'll make some mistake, some naive decision that costs everyone their jobs. And when you do, everyone will remember that you were never supposed to have this in the first place." The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside without another word. I watched the numbers climb as she rode away, probably already planning how to undermine me or position herself for when I failed. But I wasn't the same person who'd sat in the back pew at Grandma Maggie's funeral just a few days ago. Something had shifted inside me during that conference room meeting. Maybe it was anger at their assumptions about my capabilities. Or maybe it was determination to honor Grandma Maggie's faith in me. Whatever it was, I felt different, stronger, more resolved. I walked out of the law office into the late afternoon sunshine, knowing that my life had officially changed forever. Tomorrow I would start learning how to run a business. I would meet with managers and accountants and lawyers. I would make decisions that affected real people's lives. But tonight, I was still Sarah Mitchell from Scott's Addition. Tonight, I would go home to my tiny apartment and try to process everything that had happened. And tomorrow, I would begin the process of becoming whoever I was supposed to be next. The hardest part wasn't inheriting $47 million. The hardest part was believing I deserved it. The Mitchell Properties headquarters occupied an entire floor of a gleaming office building downtown, just a few blocks from the James River. I stood outside the entrance on Monday morning, wearing a new charcoal gray suit that Emily had helped me pick out over the weekend. It was the most expensive item of clothing I'd ever owned, and I felt like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Margaret Collins, the company's general manager, met me in the marble-floored lobby. She was a woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and the kind of understated confidence that came from years of making important decisions. Her handshake was firm, her smile warm but professional. "Miss Mitchell, it's an honor to finally meet you properly," she said as we rode the elevator to the 15th floor. "Your grandmother spoke of you often. She was very proud of your accomplishments." "Thank you," I managed, though I still felt like there had been some cosmic mistake. "I have to admit, I'm not sure where to begin with all this. That's completely understandable. When I started here 20 years ago, I felt overwhelmed too, and I had an MBA and 5 years of commercial real estate experience. We'll take it one step at a time. The offices were exactly what I'd expected from a successful real estate company. All glass and polished wood, with panoramic views of Richmond's skyline. Employees moved purposefully through hallways lined with architectural renderings and photographs of shopping centers, office complexes, and residential developments. Margaret led me to what had been Grandma Maggie's office, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. The furniture was elegant, but not ostentatious. A mahogany desk, leather chairs, and built-in bookshelves filled with real estate journals and business publications. Your grandmother kept things fairly simple, Margaret explained, gesturing to the desk. She believed in staying connected to the day-to-day operations rather than hiding in an ivory tower. She knew every property manager by name, remembered details about their families, understood the challenges of each location. I walked to the windows, looking down at the city where I'd grown up feeling like an outsider. From this height, Richmond looked manageable, organized, full of possibilities rather than obstacles. Margaret, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think she made the right choice? Leaving all this to me, instead of Uncle Robert or someone with actual experience? Margaret was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. Your grandmother was one of the shrewdest business people I've ever known. She didn't make impulsive decisions, especially about something as important as her life's work. If she chose you, she had good reasons. But what if I make mistakes? What if I don't understand something important and people lose their jobs because of my inexperience? You will make mistakes, Margaret said matter-of-factly. Everyone does. The question is whether you'll learn from them and surround yourself with people who can help you make better decisions. Your grandmother built this company by being willing to take calculated risks and by treating people fairly. Those aren't skills you need a business degree to develop. She opened a thick binder on the desk. This contains an overview of all our properties and operations. 23 shopping centers, 15 office buildings, over 300 residential rental units, and a portfolio of development projects in various stages of completion. The total annual revenue is approximately $8 million. The numbers were staggering. I tried to wrap my mind around the scope of what I'd inherited, but it felt like trying to understand the distance to the moon. How many people work for the company? 237 full-time employees, plus approximately 400 part-time and contract workers across all properties. Property managers, maintenance staff, leasing agents, administrative support, construction crews, landscaping teams. It's a small city's worth of people depending on the decisions made in this office. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders like a heavy coat. 237 families counting on steady paychecks. Hundreds more whose livelihoods were connected to Mitchell Properties in some way. Thousands of tenants who relied on well-maintained buildings and responsive management. I want to visit the properties, I said suddenly. All of them. I want to meet the managers and see how everything works. Margaret smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. Your grandmother used to say the same thing. She believed you couldn't manage what you didn't understand. And you couldn't understand something just by looking at spreadsheets. We spent the rest of the morning going through financial reports and organizational charts. Margaret introduced me to key staff members, the head of acquisitions, the chief financial officer, the director of property management. Each conversation felt surreal, as if I was an actor playing a role in a movie about someone else's life. But as the day progressed, something interesting began to happen. The people I met weren't treating me like an imposter or a naive college student. They were professional, respectful, and genuinely interested in working with me. Several mentioned specific conversations they'd had with Grandma Maggie about me, how she'd described my work ethic and character. During lunch, Margaret took me to Riverside Shopping Center, one of the company's flagship properties. It was a mid-sized outdoor mall, anchored by a grocery store and a pharmacy. With smaller shops and restaurants filling the spaces between, the parking lot was full, families walking between stores, teenagers hanging out near the food court. This was your grandmother's first major acquisition, Margaret explained as we walked through the central plaza. She bought it in 1978 when it was struggling, completely renovated it, and turned it into one of the most successful centers in the region. I watched a young mother pushing a stroller while her toddler ran ahead, stopping to look at the colorful window displays. An elderly man sat on a bench reading a newspaper, occasionally looking up to watch people pass by. This wasn't just a business or an investment, it was part of the community, a place where people came to meet their daily needs and connect with their neighbors. She always said that successful real estate wasn't about buildings, Margaret continued. It was about understanding what people needed and creating spaces where they could live, work, and shop comfortably. We met with Carlos Mendoza, the center manager, an energetic man in his 30s who'd been with the company for 8 years. He walked us through his office, showing charts tracking foot traffic, sales figures, and tenant satisfaction scores. Your grandmother was here just last month, he told me. She liked to walk the entire property, talk to store owners, even chat with customers. She said you could learn more in an hour of observation than in a whole day of meetings. What did she ask about during her visits? Everything. How the parking lot lighting was working, whether the restrooms were clean enough, if the landscaping needed attention. But mostly she asked about people. Were tenants happy? Were employees being treated well? Were customers finding what they needed? After our tour of Riverside, Margaret drove me to Cameron Office Complex, a cluster of 3 buildings housing medical practices, law firms, and small businesses. The architecture was more formal than the shopping center, but the same attention to detail was evident in the manicured grounds and well-maintained common areas. Dr. Amanda Foster, a pediatrician who'd been a tenant for 12 years, stopped to talk with us in the lobby. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said when Margaret introduced me. "Your grandmother was a wonderful landlord. When I was starting my practice, she worked with me on the lease terms and even helped me design the waiting room to be more child-friendly." These weren't the stories I'd expected to hear about a successful businesswoman. I'd imagined someone focused primarily on profits and returns, not someone who cared about whether a doctor's waiting room worked well for children. By the end of the day, I felt emotionally exhausted but oddly hopeful. The business was more complex than I'd imagined, but it was also more human. These weren't abstract assets on a balance sheet. They were communities where real people lived and worked and built their lives. Margaret walked me back to the main office as the sun was setting over the James River. "How are you feeling about everything?" she asked. "Overwhelmed," I admitted, but maybe not as terrified as I was this morning. Everyone seems genuinely committed to what they're doing. Your grandmother built that culture deliberately. She hired people who cared about more than just their paychecks, and she rewarded them for thinking beyond their immediate responsibilities. That's why turnover is low and why our properties consistently outperform the market. As I drove home to my apartment that evening, I realized something had shifted during the day. The inheritance was starting to feel less like an impossible burden, and more like an opportunity to continue something meaningful that Grandma Maggie had started. But that optimistic feeling evaporated when I checked my phone and found 3 voicemails from reporters, 2 from local business publications and 1 from someone claiming to represent a television news program. The Richmond Business Journal article had apparently attracted national attention, and everyone wanted to interview the quote 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 was deleting the messages when my phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. Well, she said without preamble when I answered. "I saw the photos of you at Riverside today. Playing dress-up in your new office? What do you want, Jessica?" "I want you to understand something, cousin. Just because you fooled Grandma Maggie doesn't mean you'll fool everyone else. People are already talking about how inappropriate this whole situation is." "What people?" "People who matter. Business leaders, community members, longtime clients of Mitchell Properties. They're concerned about the company's future under inexperienced leadership." I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. "Are you threatening me?" Jessica's laugh was sharp and cold. "I don't need to threaten you, Sarah. You'll destroy yourself soon enough. But I wanted to let you know that when you fail, and you will fail, There are people ready to step in and clean up the mess." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone with a mixture of anger and anxiety. Part of me knew she was just trying to undermine my confidence, but another part wondered if she was right. Maybe the people I'd met today were just being polite. Maybe behind closed doors they were expressing doubts about my ability to run the company. That night, I lay awake thinking about everything I'd learned during my first day as the owner of Mitchell Properties. The scope of the responsibility was enormous, but the people were impressive, and the work itself was meaningful. If I could figure out how to do the job without destroying what Grandma Maggie had built, maybe I could actually make a difference. The next few weeks fell into a pattern of learning and discovering. Margaret arranged for me to spend time with different departments, understanding how leasing worked, how maintenance requests were handled, how new properties were evaluated for acquisition. I met with accountants who explained cash flow and profit margins, with lawyers who walked me through contract negotiations, with construction managers who showed me how to read architectural plans. It was like drinking from a fire hose, but gradually I began to understand how all the pieces fit together. More importantly, I began to see patterns in how Grandma Maggie had approached various challenges. She'd consistently chosen quality over quick profits, had invested in long-term relationships rather than short-term gains, had treated employees and tenants as partners rather than just sources of revenue. 3 weeks after taking over, I was reviewing a proposal for a new shopping center development when Margaret knocked on my office door. "Sarah, we have a situation," she said, her expression serious. "Channel 8 News is in the lobby. They want to interview you about the inheritance and your plans for the company." My stomach dropped. I'd been avoiding media requests, but apparently they'd decided to show up unannounced. "What should I do?" "That's up to you. But if you don't talk to them, they'll probably just run a story about how you're hiding from public scrutiny." I thought about Jessica's warning that people were questioning my qualifications. Maybe it was time to address those concerns directly rather than letting others control the narrative. "Okay," I said, surprised by my own decision. "Let's do the interview." The reporter was a polished woman in her 40s named Linda Carson. She'd set up in the lobby with a cameraman, and several employees had gathered to watch from a respectful distance. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for agreeing to speak with us," Linda began once the cameras were rolling. "You've inherited one of Richmond's largest real estate companies at the age of 24, despite having no prior business experience. Some people are calling this the ultimate rags to riches story, while others are questioning whether you're qualified for such responsibility. How do you respond to those concerns?" It was exactly the question I'd been dreading, but looking at Linda's expectant face, I realized I had an answer. "I think those concerns are completely valid," I said, causing Linda's eyebrows to rise slightly. 3 weeks ago, I was working as a waitress and going to college part-time. I had no experience running a business, let alone one of this size. But what I did have was 4 years of working closely with my grandmother, learning from her about what really matters in business and in life. What do you mean by that? My grandmother didn't just build a real estate empire. She built relationships with people, employees, tenants, contractors, community members. She understood that sustainable success comes from treating people fairly and creating value for everyone involved, not just maximizing profits. But critics say that good intentions aren't enough to run a multi-million-dollar company. What's your response to those who think the business should have gone to someone with more experience? I thought about Uncle Robert, about Jessica's assumptions, about all the family members who'd written me off as the poor branch of the family tree. I think experience is valuable, but it's not the only thing that matters. My grandmother started this company with no formal business training, just hard work and a commitment to doing right by people. I'm surrounding myself with experienced professionals who can teach me what I need to know, but I'm also bringing something different to the table. A perspective shaped by understanding what it's like to struggle, what it's like to be overlooked, what it's like to depend on others for opportunity. What are your plans for Mitchell Properties going forward? I want to continue building on what my grandmother started. That means maintaining our focus on quality properties and excellent service, but it also means looking for ways to create more opportunities for people who might not otherwise have them. We're exploring partnerships with local job training programs, considering affordable housing initiatives, and looking at how we can support small businesses in our shopping centers. The interview continued for another 10 minutes, with questions about specific properties, and my transition into the role. When it was over, I felt surprisingly good about how it had gone. I'd been honest about my limitations while also articulating a vision for the company's future. But my confidence was shaken the next day when the story aired. While most of the interview was presented fairly, the introduction focused heavily on my lack of experience and included quotes from local business leaders expressing concern about Mitchell Properties' future direction. One of those quotes was obviously from Uncle Robert, though he wasn't identified by name. Margaret Mitchell built her company through decades of careful, conservative management. Dramatic changes in leadership and philosophy could jeopardize everything she worked to create. Another was clearly from someone in Jessica's circle. It's a heartwarming story, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills. Real estate is a tough business that requires knowledge and experience, not just good intentions. Watching those segments, I felt the familiar wave of self-doubt that had plagued me throughout my life. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was naive to think I could learn quickly enough to avoid making costly mistakes. But then I remembered something Grandma Maggie had told me during one of our Sunday lunches. We'd been talking about a difficult situation at school, where a professor had dismissed one of my ideas in front of the entire class. "Sarah," she'd said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully, "there will always be people who tell you that you're not qualified, not experienced enough, not the right fit for whatever opportunity comes your way. Sometimes they'll be motivated by genuine concern, and sometimes they'll be protecting their own interests. Either way, the only opinion that really matters is your own. Do you believe you can learn what you need to know? Do you believe you can make a positive difference? If the answer is yes, then you owe it to yourself to try." Sitting in my office the morning after the news story aired, I realized the answer was still yes. I did believe I could learn, and I did believe I could make a positive difference. The question was whether I'd let other people's doubts become my own. Margaret knocked on my door around 10 o'clock, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "How are you feeling about the news coverage?" she asked, settling into one of the chairs across from my desk. "Like maybe everyone else is right and I'm in over my head," I admitted. "Can I tell you something your grandmother told me when I first started here?" I nodded. "She said that the best leaders aren't the ones who know everything from the beginning. They're the ones who ask good questions, listen to the answers, and aren't afraid to admit when they don't understand something." In the 20 years I worked with her, she never pretended to know more than she did, but she also never stopped learning. Margaret pulled out a folder and placed it on my desk. "These are letters from tenants, employees, and business partners who saw your interview. I thought you might want to read them." I opened the folder to find dozens of handwritten and typed notes. Dr. Foster from Cameron Office Complex had written to say she was excited about my vision for supporting small businesses. Carlos from Riverside Shopping Center had sent a note thanking me for continuing Grandma Maggie's tradition of caring about the people who worked in the properties. Several tenants had written to express their confidence in the company's future under my leadership. But the letter that moved me most was from Tony Rodriguez at Sunrise Diner. He'd written on the restaurant's letterhead in his careful handwriting, "Sarah, I've watched you handle difficult customers, work double shifts when we were short-staffed, and treat everyone with respect regardless of how they treated you. If those aren't qualifications for leadership, I don't know what are. Congratulations, and don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve this opportunity." Reading Tony's letter, I realized something important. The people who really knew me, who'd seen how I handled responsibility and treated others, weren't questioning my qualifications. The doubts were coming from people who'd never seen me work, never witnessed my character under pressure, never bothered to get to know who I really was beyond their assumptions about class and background. That afternoon, I made two important decisions. First, I was going to stop worrying about what the critics said and focus on doing the job well. Second, I was going to implement the changes I'd mentioned in the interview, starting with a job training partnership that would help people like me find better opportunities. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same office, but everything else had changed. The job training program had placed 37 people in full-time positions across our properties. We'd broken ground on our first affordable housing project. 3 of our shopping centers had won awards for community engagement and small business support. Most importantly, I'd stopped feeling like an imposter. I was still learning, still making mistakes, still relying heavily on Margaret and other experienced team members. But I was also contributing ideas, making decisions, and seeing positive results from the vision I was implementing. The day I truly knew I'd found my place was when Mrs. Patterson from the diner called my office. I'd given her my card months earlier, thinking she might enjoy seeing one of our senior-friendly housing developments. But she was calling about something else entirely. "Sarah dear," she said in her familiar voice, "I saw that article about your affordable housing project in the newspaper. I wanted you to know how proud I am of what you're doing. Your grandmother would be so happy to see you using your opportunity to help others." Mrs. Patterson had never met Grandma Maggie, but somehow she understood exactly what this inheritance was really about. It wasn't just about money or status or proving myself to family members who'd never believed in me. It was about using the resources and platform I'd been given to create opportunities for people who needed them. That evening, I stayed late in the office, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the James River. Richmond looked different from this perspective than it had when I was walking to work at the diner before dawn. But I was different too. I'd grown into the role that had seemed so impossible just months earlier. I thought about Jessica's prediction that I would fail, about Uncle Robert's assumption that I'd eventually sell the company back to him, about all the people who'd seen me as the poor branch of the family tree. They'd been wrong about my potential, just as they'd been wrong about what really mattered in business and in life. But more than proving them wrong, I'd learned something valuable about myself. I was stronger than I'd known, more capable than I'd believed, and worthy of the faith that Grandma Maggie had placed in me. That was a gift more valuable than any inheritance. The call came on a Thursday morning in October, exactly 1 year after I'd inherited Mitchell Properties. I was reviewing plans for our second affordable housing development when Margaret knocked on my door, her expression more serious than usual. "Sarah, there's something you need to know," she said, closing the door behind her. "Robert Coleman just made an offer to purchase the company." I looked up from the architectural drawings spread across my desk. "Uncle Robert wants to buy Mitchell Properties?" "Not just him. He's partnered with Hartwell Development Group out of Virginia Beach. They're offering $62 million for the entire portfolio." The number was staggering. $15 million more than the company's appraised value when I'd inherited it. In 1 year, the properties and programs I'd been developing had increased the business's worth substantially. Did he say why now? Margaret sat down across from my desk, her expression thoughtful. "The official reason is that Hartwell wants to expand into the Richmond market, and they see Mitchell Properties as an established platform with growth potential. But I suspect there's more to it than that." She was right to be suspicious. Uncle Robert had been conspicuously absent from family gatherings since the will reading, communicating only through lawyers when necessary business matters arose. Jessica had been quieter too, though I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that she was working on some kind of business venture of her own. "What kind of more? Think about it, Sarah. You've increased the company's value by 25% in 12 months. The affordable housing project is getting state recognition. The job training program has been featured in business publications as an innovative approach to corporate social responsibility. You're succeeding in ways that make their initial dismissal of your capabilities look foolish." I walked to the window overlooking downtown Richmond. The city looked vibrant from this height, construction cranes marking new developments, people moving purposefully along the sidewalks below. A year ago, I'd felt intimidated by this view. Now it felt like home. "They want to buy the company to prove a point," I said, understanding beginning to dawn. "If they can turn it around and sell it for a profit, they can claim I was just lucky, that any success was really due to Grandma Maggie's foundation rather than anything I contributed." Exactly. And if you sell, you validate their original argument that you weren't qualified to run it long term. The irony wasn't lost on me. By succeeding, I'd made myself a target. By proving I could grow the business, I'd created an opportunity for the very people who'd predicted my failure to profit from my success. What happens if I don't sell? They'll probably try other approaches. Hostile takeover attempts, though that would be difficult given your majority ownership. More likely, they'll try to undermine your key relationships, poach talented employees, spread concerns among major tenants, create problems that make you look incompetent. I thought about the past year. All the late nights learning about commercial real estate law, the weekends spent visiting properties, and Meeting with tenants, the careful decisions about which opportunities to pursue and which to pass on. I'd built something here, not just continued what Grandma Maggie had started. The thought of Uncle Robert and his partners dismantling what I'd created to prove their point made me angrier than I'd expected. "I'm not selling," I said firmly. Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all morning. "I was hoping you'd say that. But Sarah, you need to understand what you're signing up for. Robert Coleman doesn't like to lose, and having his niece outperform his expectations is probably eating at him more than he'll admit. This won't be the end of their attempts to acquire the company." She was right, of course. But I'd learned something important during my first year as owner of Mitchell Properties. I was tired of letting other people's opinions and expectations define my choices. Uncle Robert could make all the offers he wanted. Jessica could continue spreading doubts about my capabilities. I wasn't going anywhere. That afternoon, I called a meeting with the senior management team to discuss the acquisition offer. I wanted their honest assessment of both the financial opportunity and the potential consequences of refusing. David Chen, our chief financial officer, presented the numbers with his usual precision. $62 million is a premium offer, he explained, pointing to charts showing comparable sales in the regional market. Even accounting for the improvements you've made this year, they're paying above market value. Why would they do that? Asked Linda Martinez, our head of acquisitions. Because they're not just buying properties, I said. They're buying the business model, the relationships, the reputation we've built. Plus, they want to make sure the offer is attractive enough that I'll seriously consider it. Carlos Mendoza, who'd been promoted to regional property manager, leaned forward in his chair. "Sarah, can I speak frankly?" I nodded. "When you first took over, a lot of us weren't sure what to expect. We respected your grandmother, but you were unknown. Some people figured you'd sell everything within 6 months and walk away with enough money to never work again. And now? Now we've seen what you can do. The affordable housing project isn't just good publicity. It's generating steady revenue while serving people who really need quality housing. The job training program has improved our retention rates and given us access to motivated employees who are genuinely grateful for the opportunity. You've grown this business not by cutting corners or squeezing tenants, but by creating more value for everyone involved." Around the table, I saw nods of agreement from people who'd initially been skeptical of my leadership. Margaret was right. I had built something here, something that was worth more than the money Uncle Robert was offering. "What about you, Margaret?" I asked. "What's your recommendation?" "I think you should consider the offer carefully," she said, surprising me. $62 million would set you up for life. You could start your own company, pursue any opportunity you wanted, never have to worry about money again. But I also think you'd regret giving up what you've built here. This company isn't just a collection of properties anymore. It's become a platform for the kind of work you're passionate about. Walk away now, and you'll always wonder what you could have accomplished if you'd stayed." The meeting continued for another hour, with various team members offering perspectives on market conditions, growth opportunities, and potential risks. But by the time everyone left, I'd already made my decision. I wasn't selling Mitchell Properties to Uncle Robert or anyone else. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrison and asked him to draft a formal rejection of the acquisition offer. I wanted the response to be polite but unambiguous. Mitchell Properties was not for sale at any price. Uncle Robert's reaction came faster than I'd expected. That afternoon, Jessica called my office directly. "Hello, cousin," she said, her voice carrying the same mocking tone I remembered from Grandma Maggie's funeral. "I hear you've made a very expensive mistake." "I don't know what you mean." "Turning down $62 million? Sarah, that's more money than you could spend in 3 lifetimes. What exactly are you trying to prove?" "I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to run a business." Jessica's laugh was sharp and cold. "A business you inherited, not one you built. Do you really think you're qualified to turn down that kind of money? Do you have any idea what you're walking away from?" "I know exactly what I'm walking away from," I said, feeling my temper rise. "The question is, why do you and Uncle Robert care so much whether I sell or not?" "Because we care about the family legacy. Grandma Maggie built something important, and we don't want to see you destroy it through inexperience and stubbornness. The family legacy, I repeated slowly. Jessica, when has this family ever cared about me or my decisions? When I was working at the diner, none of you offered help or support. When I was struggling to pay for college, none of you suggested I was part of any legacy worth preserving. Now that I've inherited something valuable, suddenly you're concerned about my well-being? That's not fair, Sarah. You've always what? Treated me like the poor relation? Made jokes about my clothes and my apartment and my job? Called me the poor branch of the family tree? There was silence on the other end of the line, and I realized I'd hit closer to the truth than Jessica was comfortable acknowledging. This conversation is going nowhere, she finally said. But Sarah, you should know that this offer won't be available indefinitely. Uncle Robert has other options for expanding his business interests. Then maybe he should pursue those options instead of trying to buy mine. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and adrenaline. The conversation had confirmed what I'd suspected. This wasn't really about business opportunities or family legacy. It was about control, about proving that I didn't deserve what I'd inherited, about maintaining the established hierarchy that had always kept me in my place. But I wasn't in that place anymore. I was sitting in the corner office of a successful real estate company, surrounded by people who respected my leadership and supported my vision. I'd earned their confidence not through inheritance but through performance, not through family connections but through hard work and good decisions. The thought was liberating and terrifying at the same time. If I was going to keep rejecting Uncle Robert's attempts to buy the company, I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. What came next was a carefully orchestrated campaign to undermine my credibility and create problems that would make selling look like the smart choice. It started subtly. Key employees began receiving job offers from other companies, offers that were generous enough to be tempting, but not so obvious as to constitute illegal poaching. Linda Martinez was the first to come to my office with one of these offers. She'd been with Mitchell Properties for 8 years and had been instrumental in identifying the sites for our affordable housing developments. Sarah, I need to discuss something with you, she said, looking uncomfortable as she sat down across from my desk. What's going on? I received a job offer yesterday. Hartwell Development Group wants me to head their new Richmond office. The salary is 30% more than what I'm making here, plus equity participation and a signing bonus. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Linda was not just an employee. She was one of the people who'd helped me understand the acquisition process when I was first learning the business. That's a substantial offer, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Are you planning to accept it? I don't want to. I like what we're doing here, and I believe in the direction you're taking the company. But Sarah, 30% is a lot of money. I have kids to think about, college funds to build. I understand. Can you give me a few days to see if we can match their offer? Of course. But there's something else you should know. They specifically asked about our affordable housing projects, our development timeline, our tenant relationships. This wasn't just a job interview. It felt like an intelligence gathering operation. That evening, I called an emergency meeting with Margaret and David Chen. If Hartwell was trying to poach our key people while gathering inside information about our operations, we needed to develop a response strategy quickly. How many other employees do you think they've approached? I asked. Based on the rumors I'm hearing, probably a dozen of our most valuable people, Margaret replied. It's a smart strategy, actually. If they can't buy the company, they'll try to gut our talent pool and steal our competitive advantages. David pulled out a financial analysis he'd prepared. Matching all these salary offers would cost us approximately $800,000 annually. That's manageable, but it would significantly impact our expansion plans. What about non-compete agreements? Most of our employees sign them, but they're limited in scope and duration. We can't prevent people from working in real estate, just from directly competing with specific projects for specific time periods. I stared at the numbers on David's spreadsheet, feeling the weight of leadership in a way I hadn't experienced before. These weren't abstract business decisions. They were choices that would affect real people's lives and careers. Okay, I said finally, here's what we're going to do. First, we match Linda's offer and anyone else who's received a legitimate competing proposal. Second, we accelerate our equity participation program so that key employees have a financial stake in the company's long-term success. Third, we document everything about these recruitment attempts in case we need to pursue legal action later. That's going to be expensive, David warned. Not as expensive as losing our best people and watching them take our business model to a competitor. Besides, if we're successful, the equity program will pay for itself through improved performance and retention. Over the next 2 weeks, we implemented the new compensation and equity programs, while also discovering just how extensive Hartwell's recruitment efforts had been. They'd approached nearly 20 of our employees, from property managers to administrative staff, always with the same pattern of generous offers coupled with detailed questions about our operations. But something unexpected began to happen. Instead of jumping at the higher salaries, most of our people chose to stay with Mitchell Properties. Some were swayed by the improved compensation packages, but others cited reasons that had nothing to do with money. Carlos Mendoza turned down an offer to manage Hartwell's flagship property in Virginia Beach, explaining his decision in terms that surprised me. "They offered me more money," he told me during our monthly property review meeting, "but they didn't offer me more opportunity. Here, I'm not just managing properties. I'm helping build something that matters to the community. That's worth more than a bigger paycheck." Dr. Foster, the pediatrician at Cameron Office Complex, actually called my office to report that Hartwell representatives had approached her about breaking her lease to move to one of their medical buildings. "I wanted you to know," she said, "because their offer felt more like an attempt to damage your business than a legitimate effort to serve my practice's needs." By the end of October, it was clear that Uncle Robert and Hartwell's strategy wasn't working as they'd planned. Most of our key employees had stayed, our tenant relationships remained strong, and the attempted poaching had actually strengthened internal loyalty by demonstrating how much other companies valued what we'd built. But Uncle Robert wasn't finished. The next phase of his campaign was more direct and potentially more damaging. In early November, Margaret brought me a copy of a letter that had been sent to all our major tenants and business partners. The letter, written on Hartwell Development Group letterhead, expressed concern about Mitchell Properties' inexperienced leadership and, quote, risky expansion into unproven markets. It suggested that businesses with long-term lease commitments might want to consider alternative arrangements to protect themselves from potential management instability. "This is defamation," I said after reading the letter twice. "They're deliberately trying to damage our reputation and business relationships." "Probably," Margaret agreed. "But proving it would be expensive and time-consuming. They're walking a fine line between legitimate business communication and actionable interference." I felt a familiar surge of anger, but this time it was different from the frustrated rage I'd experienced during family confrontations. This was cold, focused determination. Uncle Robert had moved beyond trying to buy the company or poach employees. Now he was actively trying to destroy what I'd built. "Schedule meetings with every tenant and business partner who received this letter," I said. "I want to address their concerns directly and personally." "Sarah, that's going to be dozens of meetings. Are you sure you want to invest that much time?" "I'm sure." "If Uncle Robert wants to make this personal, then I'll make it personal too. But I'm going to do it by being better, not by playing dirty." The next 3 weeks were exhausting, but ultimately satisfying. I met with business owners, property managers, and longtime clients, explaining our growth strategy and addressing any concerns about the company's direction. Most of the conversations were positive. People had seen the improvements we'd made to properties and services, and they appreciated the personal attention. But the most important meeting was with James Morrison, the president of Commonwealth Bank, which held mortgages on several of our properties. Mr. Morrison was a distinguished man in his 60s, who'd worked with Grandma Maggie for over 20 years. "Sarah," he said as we settled into his office overlooking Richmond's financial district, "I received the letter from Hartwell, and I wanted to discuss it with you directly." My heart sank. Commonwealth Bank was one of our most important financial partners. If they lost confidence in our management, it could trigger reviews of our other banking relationships. "I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to address your concerns," I said. Mr. Morrison smiled slightly. "Oh, I don't have concerns about your management. I wanted to discuss the letter because it reminded me of a similar situation your grandmother faced about 15 years ago." "What kind of situation?" "A competitor tried to undermine her by spreading rumors about financial instability and poor decision-making. Your grandmother's response was to invite every client and partner to tour the properties, meet the staff, and see the results for themselves. It was brilliant marketing disguised as transparency." He leaned back in his chair. "The bank has been watching your performance very closely this year, Sarah. Your loan-to-value ratios have improved. Your tenant satisfaction scores are the highest we've seen from any client, and your innovative programs are generating positive cash flow while creating community value. Frankly, we're more confident in Mitchell Properties today than we were when your uncle was involved in the business." "Uncle Robert was involved in the business?" "Peripherally. He consulted on a few deals in the 1990s, but your grandmother always maintained full control. She told me once that Robert was too focused on short-term profits and not interested enough in long-term relationships." Driving back to the office after my meeting with Mr. Morrison, I realized something important had shifted in my thinking. For months, I'd been defending myself against Uncle Robert's attacks, trying to prove I deserved what I'd inherited. But the conversation with the banker had shown me a different perspective. I wasn't just defending Grandma Maggie's legacy. I was building on it. The company was stronger, more profitable, and more socially valuable than it had been when I inherited it. Uncle Robert and Jessica could question my qualifications all they wanted, but the results spoke for themselves. That evening, I worked late in the office, reviewing financial reports and planning our strategy for the coming year. The numbers were impressive. Revenue up 18%, tenant retention at 94%, employee satisfaction at an all-time high. We'd expanded into affordable housing, launched the job training program, and increased the company's overall value by 30%. More importantly, we'd created something that went beyond traditional real estate investment. Our properties were becoming community anchors, places where small businesses could thrive, and families could find quality housing they could afford. The job training program had placed over 100 people in steady employment. The affordable housing project had a waiting list of families eager to move into well-maintained, reasonably priced apartments. As I sat in Grandma Maggie's office, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the James River, I thought about the conversation we'd had just before she died. She'd told me that character was the foundation of everything worthwhile, that success wasn't about where you started, but about how far you were willing to climb, and how many people you helped along the way. I'd climbed farther than I'd ever imagined possible, but more importantly, I'd brought other people with me. The employees who'd gained new skills and opportunities, the families living in quality, affordable housing, the small business owners who'd found success in our shopping centers. They were all part of what we'd built together. Uncle Robert's offer was still on the table, probably would be for months to come. $62 million was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. But sitting in that office, surrounded by evidence of what we'd accomplished, I knew I'd made the right choice in refusing to sell. I wasn't the poor branch of the family tree anymore. I was the trunk, strong enough to support new growth, deep enough to weather any storm. And I was just getting started. The invitation arrived on a Monday morning in December, 18 months after I'd inherited Mitchell Properties. The cream-colored envelope bore the Richmond Chamber of Commerce seal, and inside was an elegant card requesting my presence at their annual Business Leader of the Year awards ceremony. I stared at the invitation for a long moment, remembering the girl who used to serve coffee at Sunrise Diner, while dreaming of someday being taken seriously in the business world. Now I was being honored alongside CEOs and entrepreneurs who'd built Richmond's economic landscape for decades. Margaret knocked on my office door, holding an identical invitation. "Did you see this? They're recognizing you for innovation in community development and corporate social responsibility." "I saw it," I said, still somewhat disbelieving. "Do you think they made a mistake?" "Sarah, you've transformed this company and created programs that other businesses are trying to replicate. The affordable housing project is being studied by developers across Virginia. The job training initiative has been featured in national publications. You deserve this recognition." The ceremony was scheduled for a Friday evening at the Jefferson Hotel, Richmond's most prestigious venue. As the date approached, I found myself both excited and nervous about attending such a high-profile event. These weren't casual business meetings or property tours. This was Richmond's elite gathering to celebrate achievement and influence. Emily helped me choose a midnight blue dress that was elegant without being ostentatious. "You need to look like you belong there," she said, adjusting the neckline. "Because you do belong there." The Jefferson Hotel's ballroom was magnificent, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables filled with the city's most prominent business leaders. I recognized mayors, bank presidents, and company founders who'd been featured on magazine covers. For a moment, I felt like that 19-year-old girl again, intimidated by wealth and success I'd never imagined achieving. But then I saw Carlos Mendoza across the room, elegant in his tuxedo, chatting confidently with other property managers and real estate professionals. Next to him stood Linda Martinez, radiant in a burgundy gown, discussing development projects with architects and city planners. These were my colleagues, my team, people who'd helped build what we'd accomplished together. "Sarah Mitchell," a familiar voice said behind me. I turned to find James Morrison from Commonwealth Bank, impeccably dressed and accompanied by his wife. "Congratulations on your recognition tonight, well deserved." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I'm still somewhat surprised to be here." "Don't be. You've accomplished more in 18 months than most business leaders achieve in 5 years. Your grandmother would be incredibly proud." The comment brought tears to my eyes. Grandma Maggie should have been here tonight, should have seen what her faith in me had made possible. But in a way, she was here. In every relationship I'd built, every person I'd helped, every decision I'd made with her values guiding me. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversations with people who'd only known me through business headlines and industry recognition. They spoke about my innovative approaches to affordable housing, my success in balancing profitability with social responsibility, my leadership in creating opportunities for underserved communities. It was surreal to be recognized as an expert in a field I'd barely understood 2 years earlier. But listening to these conversations, I realized that expertise wasn't just about formal education or years of experience. It was about understanding problems deeply and working persistently to solve them in ways that benefited everyone involved. The awards presentation began after dinner, with various categories recognizing achievements in different sectors. I was honored in the social innovation category, alongside a nonprofit director who'd revolutionized job training for veterans and a tech entrepreneur who'd created educational software for disadvantaged students. When they called my name, I walked to the podium with confidence I wouldn't have possessed even 6 months earlier. Looking out at the audience, I saw familiar faces, employees who'd supported my vision, tenants who'd benefited from our programs, business partners who'd taken chances on an inexperienced leader. 2 years ago, I began, I was working at Sunrise Diner, in Scott's Addition, serving coffee and saving every dollar to finish college. I never imagined I'd be standing here tonight, and honestly, I'm not sure I would have believed anyone who told me this was possible. The audience was attentive, some nodding in recognition of the journey I was describing. My grandmother, Margaret Mitchell, left me more than a business when she passed away. She left me a philosophy that success isn't measured only by profit margins, but by the positive impact you have on the people around you. Everything we've accomplished at Mitchell Properties has been guided by that principle. I paused, looking out at the faces of people who'd become colleagues and partners rather than intimidating figures from a world I'd never expected to enter. The affordable housing project, the job training program, the community development initiatives. These weren't charity work or public relations gestures. They were good business decisions that created value for everyone involved. When you invest in people and communities, when you treat employees and tenants as partners rather than resources to be exploited, when you focus on long-term relationships rather than short-term profits, that's when you build something sustainable and meaningful. The applause was warm and sustained. As I returned to my seat, I felt a sense of completion, as if I'd finally stepped fully into the role that Grandma Maggie had envisioned for me. But the evening wasn't finished. During the reception that followed, I was approached by a woman I didn't immediately recognize. She was elegantly dressed, probably in her 40s, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being taken seriously in professional settings. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Rebecca Hartwell, president of Hartwell Development Group. My stomach tightened. This was the company that had partnered with Uncle Robert in trying to acquire Mitchell Properties, the organization behind the employee poaching attempts, and the defamatory letters to our business partners. "Ms. Hartwell," I said, extending my hand professionally despite my wariness. "I wanted to introduce myself and apologize for some of the approaches my company has taken regarding your business," she said, surprising me with her directness. "The recruitment efforts and communication strategies were suggested by my business partner, and I've since learned they were both inappropriate and ineffective." "Your business partner being my uncle?" "Robert Coleman, yes. He convinced me that you were inexperienced and that your success was unsustainable. He suggested that aggressive tactics would eventually force you to sell, and that we could then implement his vision for expanding the business." Rebecca glanced around the room, noting the respectful attention I'd received throughout the evening. Clearly his assessment was incorrect. "You've not only sustained what your grandmother built, you've improved it significantly." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm a businesswoman, not a family therapist. Robert's personal issues with your inheritance have cost my company time, money, and reputation. I'm ending our partnership and withdrawing all offers to purchase Mitchell Properties." She handed me a business card. "If you're ever interested in collaborative projects rather than hostile takeovers, I'd welcome the conversation. Your approach to community development is exactly the kind of innovation our industry needs." After Rebecca walked away, I stood in the hotel's ornate lobby, processing what had just happened. Uncle Robert's primary ally had not only abandoned their acquisition attempts, but had essentially repudiated his judgment and tactics. The validation felt more meaningful than the award I'd received earlier in the evening. The final surprise of the night came as I was leaving the hotel. Standing near the valet station, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting rental tuxedo, was Uncle Robert himself. He appeared older than I remembered, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. "Sarah," he said as I approached, "congratulations on your award." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely uncertain about his motives for being there. "I owe you an apology," he continued, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "The past year and a half, the acquisition attempts, the business interference, all of it was inappropriate." I waited for him to continue, curious about what had prompted this admission. "Your grandmother always said you had potential that the rest of us didn't see. I thought she was being sentimental, playing favorites with the granddaughter who reminded her of herself. I was wrong." He gestured toward the hotel's elegant facade. "Seeing you receive that award tonight, listening to people talk about what you've accomplished, I realized that Mother saw something in you that I was too proud to acknowledge." "What changed your mind?" Uncle Robert was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Jessica showed me the financial reports from your first 18 months. The revenue growth, the expansion projects, the community programs that are actually profitable. You've done things with that company that I never would have attempted, and they're working." "And Jessica?" "Jessica is struggling to accept that her assumptions about you were wrong. She's invested too much of her identity in being the successful cousin, the one who had everything figured out. Your success challenges that narrative in ways she's not ready to confront." I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. Jessica's at Grandma Maggie's funeral had been the catalyst for everything that followed, but hearing about her struggle to cope with my success didn't bring the vindication I'd expected. "Uncle Robert, I want you to know that I never intended for this inheritance to create family divisions. I've just tried to honor what Grandma Maggie built while making it my own." "You've done more than that, Sarah. You've proven that Mother's faith in you was justified, and you've made the rest of us look foolish for doubting her judgment." He extended his hand, and I shook it, feeling like we were finally meeting as equals rather than as uncle and problematic niece. "If you ever want advice about the business, or if there are projects where my construction experience might be helpful, I hope you'll ask," he said. "I'd like to support what you're doing rather than oppose it." Driving home from the Jefferson Hotel that night, I reflected on how completely my world had transformed. 2 years earlier, I'd been the poor branch of the family tree, dismissed and marginalized by relatives who saw me as a burden rather than a valuable family member. Tonight, I'd been recognized as one of Richmond's most innovative business leaders, with my uncle asking to support rather than undermine my work. But the most meaningful change wasn't in how others perceived me, it was in how I perceived myself. I'd stopped seeking validation from people who'd never valued me and started building relationships with people who appreciated what I had to offer. I'd stopped trying to prove I deserved what I'd inherited and started focusing on what I could accomplish with the opportunities I'd been given. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find a package waiting on my desk. Inside was a framed photograph of Grandma Maggie from the 1970s, standing in front of her first rental property with a satisfied smile and dirt on her hands from planting flowers in the front yard. A note was attached in Uncle Robert's handwriting. "She would be proud of the garden you're growing." Looking at that photograph, I realized that my journey wasn't really about inheriting money or proving my worth to family members who'd underestimated me. It was about discovering that I had the strength and vision to build something meaningful, to create opportunities for others, to use whatever resources I had to make a positive difference in the world around me. I wasn't the poor branch anymore. I was the tree itself, growing stronger each year, creating shade and shelter for anyone who needed it. And I was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.